Hey home bakers, it's Jack here, bakerjack.co.uk, bringing you your weekly bread making tip every single Thursday. And this week, here's 6 reasons why your dough didn't puff up properly. Roll it! Hello to you and welcome back to the Bake with Jack YouTube channel, where I share with you a little bit of my bread making expertise every single Thursday. If that's the sort of thing that you'd like, consider clicking subscribe before you go. And even better than that, if you don't want to miss anything that I do, every single blog post, every single video goes out to you in your home baker's bulletin, straight in your inbox every Thursday morning. You can sign up if you want in the link underneath. Isn't it disappointing sometimes when your bread dough doesn't puff up just like you wanted it to? Frustrating even if it doesn't come up all the way where you'd like it to be, or if it didn't come up at all and you have no idea why. I feel your pain. And so this week, let's go through with 6 reasons why that might happen. Roll on number 1. Bread dough will puff up if it's cold. It even puffs up in the fridge. But if it's colder where you are than it was in the kitchen of the person who wrote that recipe for you, stuff's going to take longer to puff up than it states in the recipe. Does that make sense? The temperature of your room is often an overlooked factor, which is exactly why I've begun to include it in the recipes on my blog. If your room is cooler than my room, you'll know what to expect and things will take a little bit longer to puff up, but it will puff up. Compare the temperature of your kitchen to my own and you'll know what to expect. Number 2. If nothing has happened over an hour of resting your dough, and I mean nothing, zero, if you take the cloth off of your dough and it's exactly what it was when you put it into the bowl an hour ago, then there's something wrong with your yeast. That's the only explanation. Fresh yeast or dry yeast, it's exactly the same. It might be too old, it might be dead, it might have stopped working and stitched you up, or you might have forgotten to put it in the first place, which has only happened one time in nearly 7 years of bread making classes. Not by me, by the way, but it has happened. In all the faff of weighing stuff out and measuring and double checking and making sure you've got everything, it's quite easy to forget something. And if your dough hasn't puffed up at all, you may well have forgotten the yeast. We're all human beings, and if that is the case, you can dissolve your yeast in a tiny bit of water, poke it in your dough and start working it through. It's going to be slippery at first, so do it in the bowl. It's going to be messy and slippery and sticky, but once it takes it on, you can get it out of the bowl, work it through for a couple of minutes to make sure there's a little bit everywhere, and rest it again. This is a big one, so much so that it had its own video a few weeks or possibly months ago. You added flour while you were kneading the dough. Don't do it. When we are kneading dough, we are developing the gluten. We're developing the strength and the elasticity inside of the dough to make it nice and strong, so that when the yeast goes to town and makes gas, the dough is heavy enough to hold all that gas and puff up. In short, when we are kneading, a change is happening. If you dust your dough because it's sticky, it will likely take up that flour and become sticky again. Then you'll dust it again and then it will take it up again, and you repeat that a couple of times and the change will happen. Your dough will come together into a nice round ball and you might think you're done, but actually you've just added a load of underworked flour to your recipe, tightening up the whole thing. And it still hasn't been worked enough. The gluten hasn't developed enough for it to be able to puff up properly. You were too impatient. As simple as it sounds, I've had lengthy conversations with people about why their bread is heavy, and after much to-ing and fro-ing, it comes apparent that they say something like, oh, I baked it half an hour early because I didn't want to wait, or it didn't look that puffy, but I baked it anyway. Seriously, it's puffing up. Give it time. This one might sound so obvious for those of you that have been here for a while and those of you that know the principles, but it's not common sense. There is no common sense to all, and sometimes it is as simple as just waiting longer. In fact, don't wait for your dough, because waiting sucks. Then you probably will get bored. No one likes waiting for stuff. You'll just get bored and toss it in the oven and think, oh, I'm done with it. Don't wait for it. Go off and do something else. Have a cup of tea for a bit and pop back later. Don't wait around watching it puff. Seriously, sometimes it's just a case of leaving it for longer. Exercise Patience, it might seem like common sense, but no sense is common to all. Next. This one kills me, seriously. You swapped out the flour. If you substitute a kilo of strong white bread flour for a kilo of wholemeal flour, and yes, we are getting to that topic soon, or a kilo of plain flour, the results are going to be different. The dough is going to have completely different characteristics, going to puff up completely different. Writing reliable recipes is so hard, and there's quite a lot of pressure attached to it, because you might pick up my recipe and bake it once it comes out rubbish and post it all over to the world and say, Jack can't write recipes, they're all terrible. And I get people getting in touch with me saying stuff like, I followed your recipe exactly to the letter, to the T, and my bread come out heavy. It didn't rise up. There was zero overspring. What am I doing wrong? And again, a couple of emails down the line, it will come out that they used 100% wholemeal, home ground, stone ground flour instead of strong white bread flour. To me, the difference is obvious, but to them, and possibly maybe to you, hey, flour is flour, right? No. As my old mantra goes, a recipe is just a record of what somebody did once, and it came out okay, so they shared it with you. Change the flour, and you've just changed about 70–75% of the ingredients, and arguably the most important one. This one is a little bit niche, it might not apply to all, but if you use warm water in your dough, like often recipes tell you to do, if your dough is warm in the beginning and you leave it resting at room temperature, it will puff up lovely the first time, but the second time it puffs up, it might puff up a little bit slower on that as you're expecting in comparison to the first time round. That's because the first puff, everything's nice and warm and toasty and the yeast is going crackers, but as the dough cools down over time, it leads to the second rest being slightly underwhelming. Sure, it's going to puff up again, but the second puff might be much slower than what you're expecting, having seen the first puff. If your yeast is good to go and your dough is strong, then it will puff up. The speed of the puff is temperature dependent. The warmer it is, the quicker the puff, the cooler it is, the slower the puff. That's why it's useful to know what your room temperature is, and that's why I put my room temperature into my recipes so you know what to expect. Don't dust the dough or the table while you're kneading. Use a Bake with Jack dough scraper to release it from the table every once in a while if it feels like it's getting stuck. Available to purchase on the Bake with Jack online shop, link underneath. You might get sticky for a bit, but you only be sticky for a bit, so relax into it, get sticky, clean your hands at the end, and your dough will thank you kindly. If nothing has happened to your dough, don't throw it away, don't just scrape it all into the bin, that's a real shame. You can try reintroducing the yeast like we spoke about earlier, but to be quite honest, I wouldn't bother with any of that stuff. I would just ball it all up into little small balls, let it rest up for half an hour or so, roll them out nice and thin with a rolling pin, and toast them in a dry frying pan and make tortilla wraps for surprise fajita night. And everybody likes a surprise fajita, don't they? Or burrito? Seriously, win-win. If you're worried about the freshness or the activity within your yeast, you can test it in a bit of sugary warm water. Put a bit of warm water in a jug, add a little bit of sugar, pop a bit of yeast in. If it foams up, it's good to go. If it doesn't foam up, it's not good to go. And finally, be patient. I would never try and speed things up by warming stuff up. I would just leave it for a little bit longer. Moving your dough somewhere else, changing its environment from somewhere cool to somewhere warm will cause problems that you would have avoided if you just hang about and waited for a bit. You'll notice if you're a bake-off fan, certainly here in the UK, that bread week most of the time is a complete disaster. That's because they're all under time constraints. They're all trying to warm stuff up and speed it up using their warming drawers. Unless you are on the bake-off. Just wait. So easy. And there are 6 reasons why your bread didn't puff up like you wanted to. If you want to see a full loaf of bread start to finish tutorial, you can. It's number 130. Go and check it out. I did it recently. It's start to finish. Everything you need to know. A little bit of waffle from me to make sure you can make a nice loaf of bread. And in fact, I redid it. I re-edited it because the first one had adverts on it. They put adverts on it because I used some copyrighted music by accident. And hopefully the second one that I put up, that hopefully it should be up by now, by the time you watch this, will have no adverts interrupting your viewing pleasure. I will link that up here somewhere if you want to see that. As always, thank you so much for stopping by for your weekly bread making tip. We do this every single Thursday. Consider clicking subscribe if you like. Click like if you liked it. And remember, I was talking about the Home Bakers Bulletin earlier. You can sign up for Home Bakers Bulletin email. You'll get all my content in your inbox every single Thursday morning. Links underneath. See you next week. Bye-bye. And there it is, your bread tip for the week. Thanks so much for stopping by. As I always say, every single Thursday. You guys, I really enjoy making these videos. I hope you enjoy watching them too. And apologies, there wasn't a pencil on my ear today. Completely dropped the ball on that one. There will definitely be one there next week. See you then.